Back with that custom clean, the SL Amps version of the Dumble SSS, and it's a very, very peculiar failure mode. And what's strangest to me is that it was working and then it stopped, and I'm not sure what happened. Let me repeat the problem for those of you who didn't see the previous video or don't have the particulars fresh in your mind. With the amp in standby, I got 755 B plus unloaded on the first filter, which is before the standby switch, before the reservoir stage. This whole thing becomes the reservoir stage when it's out of standby. And in that condition, the negative voltage, which feeds the cathodes of this cathode follower stage and provides the bias, is at negative 206. If I take it out of standby, the plate voltage drops from 700 something to, oh look, we're at 30 volts. It's climbing up a little bit. We got 61 volts here now, and that's pretty much what the B plus is in the amp. 61 volts, and this negative voltage here is now negative 790. Let me pause it for just a moment. Not pause the video, rather take it out, put it back on standby for safety's sake. I have tried quite a few things. Number one, this stage here, the negative 790, is supposed to be more like negative 380. And it had a 500 volt cap there. So I have temped in two 500 volt caps in series. It's not the most elegant thing, and it's not going to be how the amp would be when it's done. But while I have this problem condition, I need to have the bias filtered. So this gives me 1,000 volts capability. So that's not going to eat up caps. In the original capacitors in the amp, this capacitor and this capacitor had shorted as a result of the failure, which started us down this road. And these three have been temped in. I was going to change this one just because whatever condition shorted this one and this one had been applied to this one, and I didn't trust it. In the sense that capacitors and resistors are fairly inexpensive, I changed out these two. These old ones are still glued in place, but they're not connected, and got new balance resistors there. And I was concerned maybe we just had a bad diode in the rectification. So the old diodes are still there on the board, and they're not connected to anything right now. And so I've got this new diode string up in the air. It's not lovely, but it's functional. All these diodes tested good, but there's the how it tests versus what current is through it kind of thing. So I wanted fresh. So as I know it's not a problem in the diodes. It's not a problem with any of these capacitors. All these capacitor grounds are grounded. I have confirmed that. If let me power it off for a moment, and I'm going to disconnect these two nodes. This node goes to the reverb transformer, even though the AT7 for that is pulled. And this node goes to the preamp, which has three other filter stages. And if I remove those two loads, all right, so those two wires are disconnected. So the preamp is out of the circuit, and I have pulled the actual phase inverter tubes. So if there's any hum in the preamp, because the filter caps have been disconnected and they don't have any B plus now, the whole thing is out. So all we have here is the cathode follower. It's being fed nothing. And it's getting its plate connection from the screen supply. Now take that out of standby. And we were at what? We were at 60 on the plates a minute ago. Now we're at 168, 170. It's climbing up. What does it climb up to? It's 194. It's climbing up now. And that negative 790 is now at negative 670. it's decreasing as this climbs. We're at 216, 218 now. This should be close to 500 volts. And the screen is at 223. Before, the screen was at 470 something. The thing that's killing me is that in the previous video, when I first sussed out that these two caps had failed, and I replaced them, and they were up in the air like this, and I powered the amp on and took it out of standby, I was getting almost 500 volts here. I was getting 470 here, and all these were proportionately correct, and this was fine, and all that was great. And I tested the high power and low power mode. Nothing went wrong. I powered the amp off to measure the DCR so I could measure the bias. Then I powered it back on and took it out of standby. And all of a sudden I had this problem where this was artificially low and this was insanely high. It's insanely low, actually. It's negative 700 volts, so it's really low. But, 700 versus under 300, that's a huge discrepancy. And 100 volts-ish on the plates versus almost 500 on the plates, that's a huge discrepancy. But nothing in the amp was changed between it working and it not working, as if something just gave up the ghost. Something which had probably experienced some surge or damage previously when all this happened. Once the voltages came up, it gave up, and I can't find it yet. So something is drawing too much current through the B+ string. And it has to be somewhere around here. This does this. I've changed out the power tubes. Makes no matter. Which means that as this current goes, what's weird to me is that I can understand if this voltage drops, that this other voltage derived from the HT that goes to the negative would increase. But that doesn't make any sense because this would be taking all the current. There'd be less current available for this. They should be scaling pretty much together. And I'm a little bit of a loss as to what the culprit could be. I'm a little suspicious of this 820K and this 150K. But, it's a very odd situation I find myself in. And any further load on this stage from having the preamp and reverb connections in place, that just drops the voltage even more. But even without out of place, the voltage here is already much lower than it should be. I've tried putting in a different choke with a 15 Henry, I don't remember what it was. It wasn't something correct for this, but it was something which would be a good test. It does not seem to be this choke. I have disconnected the output transformer center tap. No difference. Well, there is a difference. It's the same kind of difference you get disconnecting the preamps. The less load there is, the less the voltage drop is there. But the output transformer does not seem to be the cause of the voltage drop. What I'm beginning to suspect, and this is potentially bad news for the owner, and I want to do some more tests before I do anything radical. I suspect that when this failure mode occurred and all the burn damage occurred, there was damage to the HT windings in the power transformer. And when it's in standby and there's no real current being drawn, all the voltages go up, it's fine. As soon as I'm drawing current through it, and the more that voltage drops, and the more current I add by having those other stages, the more that voltage drops. And as that voltage drops, the voltage on the raw voltage on the HT supply, which goes to the bias, which is actually that wire going to here, goes way the hell up. And that's where we're at. So I strongly suspect it's the power transformer. I don't think I have another power transformer for a twin reverb, which is what this probably is, handy. Like I said, before I tell the owner that we've got to get a new power transformer for this, and I price that out and install it and all that, I want to be sure that I'm not missing something else. But I have done an awful lot of things. The changes that I made to this amp before discovering this problem were minor, mostly just a difference of how the circuit was constructed to better dissipate heat. These fuses on the cathodes of the 6V6s that I added will not cause this problem, could not cause this problem. They can only be of benefit. I'm really beginning to suspect that we just have a bad power transformer, and it had been hurt by the previous failure mode, and it was working for a while until all of a sudden it wasn't. And it's just coincidental that it happened between me first testing it and then me being able to check the bias. And having all these, the huge short and burn on the low voltage, a negative voltage supply over here, and having two dead short filter caps, especially this one here, which is on the screen node, probably stressed that power transformer. And I think that's what we're most likely looking at. I'm going to do a few other things just to try to rule that out. I wish I had a spare twin reverb power transformer here that I could just, put a piece of cardboard up here, put the transformer on here, run the wires where they need to go temporarily and say, fingers crossed time. But I don't. I often do have things like that, not at the moment. And again, if you haven't seen the previous video, none of this is how the amp would go out. This board will get rebuilt properly, and only the original builder and I would know what the differences are by the time I'm done. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. Now, I have also done this without the power tubes in place, and this voltage goes dangerously high for these 500 volt rated caps. I did it very briefly as a result. The problem is still there. It's not as bad without the power tubes because they are a big, they are current hungry. That's a big source of the current draw in a B+, but it is still there because without the power tubes, I would expect this thing to, if this is 700 unloaded, I would expect it to be in the 600s even without the power tubes. And it just isn't. So that's where I'm stopping for the night. This is the kind of stuff that drives you crazy as a tech because you don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you also don't want to be the bearer of incorrect bad news. I don't want to tell the guy it's a power transformer if it turns out that this resistor over here is bad and I just haven't found it yet. So I've got some more due diligence to do. But it's not looking good. We'll just say that.